is that this boundary, which is marked so clearly down here on the head, is significant, I think, down to the bottom of the cheek there, but then it runs back too quickly to the line of the jaw. I mean, it starts with these two structural points on the zygomatic arch and comes down like that to the point of the chin. What you've tended to do there is to draw it that way, like that.
Life drawing presupposes that the human figure is the central and staple subject of art. And as long as that priority was unquestioned, Raphael and the classical tradition remained at the heart of what was and is taught at the academies. But can they be reconciled to the very different priorities of art in our own time?
We can learn an awful lot from him. But
how does Raphael look to students at the Royal Academy schools today?
We've got to absorb all these various influences. You can't turn your back on everything that's gone before you and try to be original. There's too much of this being original nowadays. It's important to assimilate what's gone on behind you, and only then can you evolve your own artistic language.
I mean, I'm wondering why have you selected this one as something special?
I like the middle period Raphael, the type of painting that seems to emulate the Michelangelo. They're very pastel colours. I like them very much because they're not bright like the very early paintings. There is a sort of restraint in the colour, which I find modernistic, I must say. There is an almost freedom to the colour, which I think is important. He isn't restrained by this old master approach. I also like the design. There's a freedom of design, especially in the Galatea picture, where he seems to take the rhythms of the figures and develop them in a very personalized way. They are painted, you could say, stylistically similarly to Michelangelo, but they have very much a sensitivity towards a personal vision, which is totally Raphael's, and to that extent I find him very interesting.
Working in the studio, I've often looked at that picture and I've done some drawings of it, just in the space, because in the studio itself I've done a lot of paintings about the studio, and we've got a similar type of architecture in the schools, which, classical, you could say in some ways, which reverberates in that painting. And the use of the figures in the space is very interesting. But I don't think any modern painters come close to using figures like that now.
This drawing from the antique, which is something that seemed to come, I don't know, maybe after Raphael, and it was picked up by the Academy schools. It's something I just can't come to terms with. Drawing from the antique, that kind of classical approach, for me, is something that's dead. I think it's misconstruing Raphael's motives. Raphael drew as a means to putting a painting together. I think his drawings convey very specific emotions.
Raphael's drawings have been prized and studied among artists particularly, almost more than his paintings. They are the way into the processes of his creative imagination, the revelation of how the classicizing vision has to be nourished on the study of reality and life. But they still leave certain problems unresolved for the artists today. Problems of what tradition is, and whether this tradition has any further lessons to pass on.
We found at the beginning of the century and the end of the last, artists trying to assert a new reality, a new and fresh way of reading nature. If we now look back, we will find that, of course, in the tradition derived from Giotto and Masaccio, that we are in a way set in Raphael's position. We have the choice of pursuing the pursuits of post-war artists or post-Cézanne artists to develop painting into so many different ways, whether it be surrealism, cubism, or whatever. And in a way, we have this terrible problem of whether we are ourselves going to become mannered or eclectic. with such a strong 20th century tradition to pursue and follow.
That very ability to reinterpret the past attracted students of architecture to Raphael. He left one major project unfinished at his death, not a painting, but an environment, a high Renaissance evocation of gracious living in the palmiest days of ancient Rome. It is called the Villa Madama, and it was planned to be twice its present size. It is set among garden terraces, pools and fountains, one of them of an elephant, surely Pope Leo X's famous elephant Hanno, whose funeral portrait Raphael had painted in the great court of the Vatican. The Villa Madama is again a Raphael concept carried out by his collaborators and assistants, and they crowned their work with the decoration of its great loggia. Raphael was already dead when these panels were painted, but his workshop still owned the vast collection of his unused drawings, designs and sketchbooks. Interior decoration was influenced for centuries by this Roman practice of mixing colour and relief, painting and stucco work. Raphael had not only been the leading authority of his day on Roman architecture, he was himself a practicing architect who made the classical idiom fashionable. People came to him for a new villa or a new palazzo in the approved classical revival style. Only two certain examples remain today, this one in Rome itself. And even so, the Palazzo Vidoni Caparelli may partly have been built by Giulio Romano, his pupil and assistant. But the heavy rustication is in his style and the steady rhythmic beat of the facade. It is authentically Roman, correct and sober. His other surviving design is in Florence, the Palazzo Pandolfini. The most influential Italian architect of the next generation, Andrea Palladio, knew and admired Raphael's work. And it is through Palladio that Raphael's architecture made its own contribution to the classical idiom of Europe. The classical Italian villa was made for the classical Mediterranean climate, but it was too elegant a concept to be left for only Latin countries to enjoy. We are in England, on the Isle of Wight. The time is the 1840s. And here, if anywhere, the full 19th century apotheosis of Raphael finds its grandest, indeed its most royal expression. Osborne House, a country villa designed to evoke the spirit of the divine painter, his art, his fame, even his architectural style. A house attuned to a new taste for the classical. It was a country retreat for Queen Victoria, but the passion for Raphael was Prince Albert's. He set the style and devised the setting. In his private sanctum, among other mementos of his interests, both domestic and cultural, Raphael, like a member of the family, above the carving of a royal baby's hand. In the billiard room, one of those charming absurdities the 19th century invented about Raphael, why he might have had to paint the Madonna della Sedia in a circle. The furniture in the drawing room inlaid with porcelain plaques after Raphael. The side of the piano decorated with them. The portrait of a violinist at that time still attributed to the master. Copied on porcelain also the young queen, as if through Raphael's eyes. And in the bedroom, a Madonna by an artist who shared Prince Albert's enthusiasm, an artist who linked the English pre-Raphaelites with an influential Raphaelite movement in Germany. His name was William Dyce. Dyce had been to Rome. Prince Albert had known Rome also before his marriage, and he knew its art. But this was Rome at the height of the Romantic movement, the Rome of Shelley and Keats, a Rome swarming with foreign poets and painters, where not flower sellers but artists' models foregathered daily on the Spanish steps. It was the heyday also of the Café Greco. Goethe came here, Byron came here. And it was the haunt of artists. And in the flood tide of Romanticism, the image of Rome changed, and with it, the classical ideal. Among the habitués of the Café Greco in the 1820s was a group of German painters called the Nazarenes. Like other foreign artists who paid their bills with paintings, they had made Rome their headquarters. They were classicists of a new kind, and they looked at Raphael in a new spirit. The Triumph of Religion in the Arts by Friedrich Overbeck. To the Nazarenes, Rome was not the classical city, it was the holy city, and art was an expression of Christian piety. That was to become a very popular 19th century attitude. Raphael, dressed in white, was for them a religious artist at the crowning point of a Christian tradition dating back to Charlemagne. Like many fundamentalists, they were rather muddle-headed, but they were quite sure that only art up to the High Renaissance had been pure in style and pure in soul. They rediscovered what had long been overlooked, Raphael's early paintings, like the Entombment, and they tried, however clumsily, to emulate a youthful, romantic sentiment they found there. In 1819, they began one of the major decorative achievements of the 19th century, the still little-known and neglected frescoes in 3 rooms of the Casino Massimo. This was the Nazarene style which was to influence in France the clear, clean line of Ingres, and in England, pre-Raphaelite painters like Millet. The poet Tasso introduces the theme of one room, scenes from his romantic epic, Jerusalem Delivered. Epic themes on an epic scale, that was the aim. And the Nazarenes looked to Raphael to guide them, the Raphael of the great narrative frescoes in the Vatican, like the Heliodorus and the Mass at Bolsena. On the ceiling, a Raphaelesque figure of Jerusalem Delivered. Christian allegory, Christian endeavor, but told, as the poem is, in a spirit of heroic adventure and high romance, like the interlude of the warrior maiden Erminia among the shepherds. This scene is by Overbeck. Others are by Joseph Fury. In the clash of Crusaders and Saracens, romantic love triumphs on the battlefield. Rinaldo meets Armida, disguised as a Christian knight. A second room and another epic romance, Ariosto's Orlando Furioso. The greatest paladin of Charlemagne's army, driven mad by love to discover that Angelica has married his Moorish rival, Medoro. Echoes of Raphael's Parnassus, setting a mood of pastoral idyll. The artist this time is Schnorr von Karosfeld. Eventually, Orlando will come to the rescue of Christendom in peril. The Saracens are besieging Paris and have driven Charlemagne's army back behind the city walls. Raphael's ingenuity in the Vatican in fitting a fresco round awkward windows and doorways has been ingeniously adopted here. In the space beyond, Charlemagne's army rallies to the counterattack. The figure of a fleeing woman from Raphael's Burning of the Borgo. The Nazarenes made a practice of studying Raphael daily at the Vatican or the Villa Farnesina, with a very northern devotion to the classical Italian south. But they studied him also with a sense of mission which they were to carry back with them to Germany. A mission about the role of fresco painting in high art. Only fresco, they argued, could supply the scale demanded of the greatest themes, Christian themes and moral subjects. But by the 1820s, fresco had been neglected for nearly half a century. The Nazarenes relearned the almost forgotten technique of tracing and painting a large-scale design direct into the wet plaster of a wall. Their ideas caught the imagination of their fellow countryman, Prince Albert, and also of William Dyce. And so it was that they reached England and Osborne House. Dicey's fresco was visible from the nursery floor, where the staff were shocked at quite so much nudity within sight of the children. The Queen, however, had approved the design. The subject was Britannia accepting the empire of the waves from Neptune. The style is Nazarene, the tone Victorian at its most fulsome, but among the waves are sea gods from Raphael's Galatea. But by now there is something faintly absurd in this training for an effect which no longer comes naturally. Technically, the fresco is extremely skillful, but as elsewhere in Europe, academic painting was being forced into an outdated role. It was becoming pretentious. As the Nazarenes had foreseen, the 19th century had a demanding sense of high art for high occasion. Amid the Gothic splendors of the Queen's robing room in the House of Lords, Raphael was adapted again. The artist again is William Dyce. The title, Religion. And the inspiration is Raphael's fresco in the Vatican called the Disputa, whose subject is also the triumph of Christian faith. The homage is outright and in its way sincere, but it is almost the last time we called on to serve this role in public art. He had done so for 3 centuries, but now the great gear change of modern history had begun in society, politics, and not least in culture. Even while Prince Albert encouraged the scheme to fresco the Houses of Parliament, in France the Impressionists were painting a new kind of picture which would make allegorical narrative like this relevant. Dicey's defeated king is Raphael's figure of the dying Ananias. We are no longer equipped to pay that kind of tribute, even if we believed in it, and perhaps only the 19th century could. In 1861, Prince Albert himself died. As he and the Queen had already planned, a private mausoleum was built at Frog near Windsor Castle. And at the Queen's wish, it was designed as Osborne House had been designed, to reflect the art, style and memory of the artist Prince Albert had regarded as the greatest of all time. Above the altar, from Raphael's drawing, a version of his resurrection of Christ. Adapted from a Raphael fresco in Santa Maria della Pace in Rome, the figure of the prophet Isaiah rendered in marble. Across the aisle, another of Daniel, and from the same fresco, Solomon. Over the entrance door, a copy of Raphael's fresco of the cardinal virtues from the Stanza della Sagnatura. On the ceiling, one chapel, an Annunciation after Raphael. On another, his Road to Calvary, which is now the Prado Museum in Madrid. the expulsion from Eden, the Vatican Loggia. Carved as a bas-relief, one of Raphael's early designs for the painting The Entombment of Christ. No artist has been more devotedly admired or more royally enshrined. But where has it left the real Raphael? Today we have to search for him again and rediscover for ourselves, on our own terms, an art which inspires many generations.